Good evening and welcome to our TV show featuring documentaries revealing the realities behind myths using research and scholarship. I'm your host Ergün Kırlıkovalı and I will be with you every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're welcome to send me your feedback at #ethicide. Raphael Lemkin was a Polish lawyer of Jewish heritage who is known for coining the term genocide and setting in motion the United Nations Genocide Convention. Lemkin introduced the word genocide in his 1944 book entitled Axis Rule in Occupied Europe. The idea of genocide was widely accepted by the international community and was used at the Nuremberg trials. Lemkin was born in 1900 in the Russian Empire, in the region known as Belarus today. His father was a farmer and his mother an intellectual. Lemkin and his two brothers were homeschooled by their mother. The Lemkin family farm was destroyed during the World War I by fighting between Russian and German troops. After getting his initial education in Poland, Lemkin went to Heidelberg University in Germany to study philosophy and returned in 1926 to Lwów in Ukraine to study law. Lemkin was the public prosecutor in Warsaw from 1929 to 1934, when he also served as the secretary of the Committee on Codification of Laws. Lemkin was appointed in 1937 a member of the Polish mission to the Fourth Congress on Criminal Law in Paris, where he introduced the concept of defending peace through criminal law. In 1939, barely evading German Nazi capture, Lemkin left Warsaw. He went to Sweden, where he lectured at the University of Stockholm in 1940. There he researched the imposition of Nazi rule on occupied countries and gathered Nazi administrative documents reflecting Nazi goals. Lemkin then received permission to enter the United States and arrived in 1941. He managed to save his own life but lost 49 loved ones in the Holocaust. Lemkin joined the law faculty at Duke University in 1941 and lectured at the School of Military Government at the University of Virginia in 1942. He was appointed consultant to the U.S. Board of Economic Warfare in 1943. His book was published in 1944. From 1945 to 1946, Lemkin served as an advisor to the Supreme Court of the United States Justice and Nuremberg trial chief, counsel Robert H. Jackson. In 1948, Lemkin started giving lectures on criminal law at Yale University, and in 1955, he became a professor at Rutgers School of Law. The U.S. supported Lemkin's idea of a genocide convention, although some scholars maintain that the U.S. was the driving force behind it, and Lemkin was just a useful tool. The Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide was formally presented and adopted on December 9, 1948. It came into force 3 years later when the 20th nation had ratified the treaty in 1951. Only genocide claims after 1951 can be adjudicated by this convention, no exceptions. Lemkin died in 1959 at the age of 59 and left two unfinished works: The Introduction to the Study of Genocide and the 3-volume History of Genocide. The latter listed 62 proposed genocides. According to Lemkin, the suffering of Jews in Eastern Poland was part of a larger injustice going back in time and spread around the world. The greatest irony in all this may be that the United States did not ratify the Genocide Convention during his lifetime. The Democratic Senator William Proxmire of Wisconsin pleaded for the US to ratify it in over 3,000 speeches he delivered between 1957 and 1989. The US finally ratified it in November 1988. As Raphael Lemkin's papers reveal, political motivations often trump the impartiality of academic work, especially in the case of Turkish-Armenian conflict. The manipulation done by using Raphael Lemkin name to promote genocide claims against Turks is the deceit aspect of persistent anti-Turkish campaign. Lemkin attempted in the late 1950s to promote the concept of genocide independently by writing a book under the title Introduction to the Study of Genocide. The book was never published, but the proposal for the book shows his desire to widen the applicability of the term by listing a total of 62 cases of genocide in antiquity, the Middle Ages, and modernity. Of the 41 cases in modern times, number 39 states Armenians. Number 9 on that list is genocide by the Greeks against the Turks. The Lemkin papers also show that he had 100 pages on the case of Belgian Congo and 98 pages on the genocide against the American Indians. So why did the Armenians deliberately misrepresent these facts to the public as Lemkin's motivation was 1915 events? Why? If you can understand this kind of virulent extremism and deceit, then you can understand the moral character of the Armenian lobby today. Lemkin did not reserve a special place in his work for the Armenian tragedy. For example, Article 2 of the UN Genocide Convention demands that intent to destroy be proven, whereas in reality, what was proven was the Ottoman government's intent to defend its homeland against a series of massive secessionist rebellions and supreme treason by Armenians during a wartime of survival for the Ottoman Empire. Americans should understand this well, as a civil war was fought in this country between 1861 and 1865. And then we have the Article 6 of the UN Genocide Convention that dictates that a genocide charge be adjudicated by a competent tribunal, not personal opinions, hunches, or convictions, whether of Lemkins, genocide scholars, journalists, diplomats, or others. ICJ, the International Court of Justice in The Hague, was established by the United Nations just for this purpose. Lemkin's book, Axis Rule, lists many instances of genocide without a single mention of Armenians. Curiously, the examples described in that book as genocide are mostly ignored by those who claim to have read Lemkin's mind. We now know that much of what Lemkin said publicly was tailor-made to the type of audience and location. For example, he gave an interview to CBS in 1949 when he was working with Christian groups and stated that he became interested in genocide because of what happened to Armenians. However, while he was campaigning for genocide ratification in Italy, his answer to the same question, or to the question, when did you first become interested in genocide, had no reference to the Armenians at all. His autobiography, rejected by publishers in 1958 due to poor grammar and lack of public interest, was published in 2013 as a result of the influence exerted by the so-called genocide scholars. The book is replete with unwarranted and irrelevant references to Armenians, turning the book into the glorification of the alleged Armenian genocide, the long discredited political claim. The Lemkin papers also show that Lemkin's assessment of the Turkish-Armenian conflict were largely based on the writings of two very unreliable sources. One, Arnold J. Toynbee, a young historian tasked by the British government to generate wartime propaganda defaming and demonizing Germans and Turks in 1916. 2. The US ambassador in Istanbul, Henry Morgenthau, an anti-Turkish, Islamophobic, racist, and scheming real estate developer turned diplomat, who relied on his two Armenian assistants, Shimavonian and Andonian, for information from the field. Morgenthau never left Istanbul during his 26-month stay, except for a visit to Palestine. He preferred to take at face value all the field reports sent by the Armenian revolutionaries through Protestant missionaries and US consulates. He cultivated an erroneous perception that can be summarized as all Turks are bad, all Armenians are good. A black and white history based on stereotyping, hearsay, and forgeries. He had a propaganda book of falsifications and lies ghostwritten for him in 1918, titled Ambassador Morgenthau's Story. By his own admission, to drum up support for the US government's war effort during World War I. Lemkin's listing of many genocides shows that whoever singles out the Turkish-Armenian conflict as Lemkin's sole inspiration does so for political considerations. Case in point is the book Totally Unofficial, the autobiography of Lemkin. In the acknowledgments section, the book's editor, Donna Lee Fries, thanks an Armenian activist well known for his Turk-bashing literature. She says, "I'm deeply appreciative of Balakian's support and encouragement, which has been steadfast since the beginning." Oh, I bet it has. This might explain the totally arbitrary inclusion on page 11 of a piece that sticks out like a sore thumb. I quote, "When Lemkin was 14, during World War I, the Germans occupied Volkovisk, Lemkin's hometown, and the Ottoman Empire embarked on what Lemkin characterized as the sinister panorama of destruction of the Armenians." Unquote. Lofty words for a 14-year-old kid, don't you think? We are asked to believe that during the tumultuous days of World War I, when a 14-year-old Lemkin's hometown is occupied by Germans and death and destruction were everywhere, Lemkin was able to set aside his personal shock, sorrow, and indignation, seek to find access to reliable international news in wartime small-town Poland on what transpired in the Ottoman Empire thousands of miles away, and based on his erudite analysis, predict that a genocide might be looming almost a year before 1915 events. Some clairvoyant kid Lemkin must have been. The question begs to be asked, is it really Lemkin talking here, or Balakian's pesky writing? I wonder. Lemkin died in 1959, and this book was not published for 54 years until the Armenian lobby stepped in 2013 and polluted the book with copious amounts of imagined references to Armenians, such as the one I just mentioned. Another ominous sign of Armenian manipulation of Lemkin's biography is the quotation on page 11. I quote, "According to Steinson-Ehrlich, it was the intended destruction of Armenians that triggered Lemkin's moral interest in the protection of groups." Is Ehrlich a mind reader? Where is the proof? Isn't it easy to put words in Lemkin's mouth or ideas in his head by writers with a cause? Deliberate misrepresentations continue. We're asked to believe that a legal scholar with conscience, like Lemkin, approved Sogomon Tehlirian's acquittal at a Berlin court in 1921. As you all know, Tehlirian, a cold-blooded Armenian murderer who shot Talat Pasha in the back of his neck, in broad daylight on March 15, 1921, was found not guilty by a German court after only a 2-day trial. Prosecution witnesses were not heard, and the cross-examination of the defense claims were not allowed. It was a dreadful kangaroo court. Common sense would dictate that a law and order inclined young man like Lemkin would protest such mockery of justice, not revel in it. The needless dropping of Tehlirian hint in the book is yet another sneaky and dishonest effort by the Armenian lobby, presumably to kill two birds with one stone. One, that Lemkin approved of the 1921 Berlin adjudication of the Armenian terrorist Tehlirian as proper, so no one should doubt the health of the due process at Berlin Kangaroo Court. And two, Armenian experiences figured in heavily in Lemkin's coining of the term genocide. Neither are true. This year happens to be the 100th anniversary of Berlin's Kangaroo Court proceedings, acquitting Tehlirian. I urge the German courts to reopen this case and retry an Armenian assassin and terrorist for what he really is, a bloodthirsty terrorist. You might be stunned to know that Tehlirian is afforded a national hero status in Armenia, complete with a statue which depicts a man standing tall with Talat Pasha's severed head under his feet. Disgusting. If you're disgusted by this display of raw ultranationalist fervor, welcome to the landlocked, poverty-stricken, corrupt, racist, and violent Armenia. On page 13, we have this. Lemkin emphasized the imperative of outlawing the destruction of peoples on an international stage. Jewish historian Simon Dubnow agreed. I have always felt that history must sit in judgment, he said. But history is not sitting in judgment in the case of Turkish-Armenian conflict. Propaganda, perception, and political expediency are. So the book, totally unofficial, might be more about the Armenian lobby using Lemkin's credibility as a tool to advance the Armenian cause and less about Lemkin's real life. The narrow focus on Lemkin gives the genocide narrative an artificial direction. It leaves out the history of Native Americans, African Americans, and Asian Americans, for example. It also seems to have a whitewashing effect on the countless war crimes committed by Armenian revolutionaries for many decades leading up to 1915. I wonder what Lemkin would think if he knew that Armenians took up arms against their own government, went on a killing rampage, victimizing their fellow Ottoman citizens of Islamic faith and Jewish faith and Turkish ethnicity, joined the invading enemy armies, and then cried foul when Turks defended their homeland courageously. I wonder if Lemkin would get angry at Armenians for deceiving and misrepresenting so much. The Armenian references were arbitrarily inserted into the Lemkin narrative, as the Armenians were not mentioned in Lemkin's book at all in Axis rule in occupied Europe. The book was written and published in Washington, D.C. to meet a particular U.S. interest, and there was no reason for U.S. to put Armenians in, as no reasonable reader would equate Nazi Germany's craving for expansion with the Ottoman Empire's fight for survival. A prolific researcher and scholar, PhD in history, Tal Buenos suggests that the current flawed genocide scholarship benefited the US government, which may have had a design and been the driving force behind the Lemkin publication. Tal Buenos' indicators are formidable. One, the Turks were not systematically accused of genocide in American academia and media until the US was accused of committing genocide in Vietnam. 2. Lemkin was born into the 20th century after the bulk of the massacres committed by Anglo-Saxon colonialism and passed away just before the unprecedented American bombardment of villagers in Indochina. The choice of a Lemkin-centered narrative made it seem natural to leave the Vietnam experience out of the genocide discourse. The millions of tons of bombs that the US dropped on villages in Indochina would not fall within the academic interest of the genocide discourse. How interesting. For a while, there were major accusations by intellectuals around the world. Even an international tribunal was set up by Bertrand Russell and Jean-Paul Sartre, which found the US guilty of genocide after the term had already been made legal by the UN Genocide Convention. 3. So the Armenian narrative was perfect to thwart the focus. It came with an existing literature, although mostly anti-Turkish and anti-Muslim propaganda. But if the discourse is controlled, then nobody would be able to challenge the authenticity of this information. And the propaganda can be believed as the villains in the story are Muslims. This Armenian narrative is fascinating in the West because it confirms people's prejudicial suspicions about Muslims. It corresponds with Orientalism. The genocide scholarship promoting an imagined Lemkin narrative minimizes 5 realities. 1. Lemkin's employment by the US government. 2. The total irrelevance of the 1915 events in the origination of the term genocide. 3. The role of the book's publisher, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, working almost like a wartime propaganda office. 4. And Lemkin's incompetence, although he was billed as an expert in international law and history, he was neither. 5. Lemkin's inability to write in good English. His autobiography, totally unofficial, was rejected by the publishers in 1958 due to Lemkin's poor grammar. If Lemkin had poor grammar in 1958, then shouldn't it stand to reason that his grammar was likely poorer in 1944 when the Axis rule in occupied Europe was written? Lemkin arrived at the US in 1941. It is highly unlikely that within the 3 years he was able to master the English language and write over 600 pages of perfect English grammar. Was it translated? No, because we do not have a transcript. Ghostwritten? More than likely. In view of this uncertainty surrounding the book's authorship and the certainty regarding it being a product of an established American political elite, the common narrative presented by genocide scholars about Lemkin and the origin of the term appears to be dubious. Will the Armenian lobby stop its mass deception? Will Turkish Americans engage the American political system more to have their voices heard? Those are great questions for future discussions. Thank you for joining me. See you next week.